Hello, folks. Welcome to Holding On with Holder, where I talk to interesting people about interesting topics. My name is Steve Holder, and I am your host. My guest this evening is Arlene Marron, talented author of Beneath a Blanket of Snow. Welcome, Arlene. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve.
Well, I am glad to have you. I'm always about talking to interesting people, and I love talking to other authors, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. Now, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, it's a little unusual in that I was interested in writing as an adolescent, and I actually wrote probably a few pages of the first chapter of a book when I was 11 or 12 years old. And then I took some writing courses in high school, and I was thinking about going to college for literature or journalism, something in the writing field. And lo and behold, I went to nursing school instead. Didn't think much about writing over the years. I always had a pretty good command of grammar and was a good speller and could write well, but I never really thought about doing anything. Raised children, married, divorced, remarried, grandchildren, and in December of 2019, I was getting ready to retire from my nursing career, and a coworker said to me, "Now you can start your bucket list." And I immediately replied, "Oh, I'm going to write my novel." And I was as surprised as she was when I said that, because I had not thought about that. Wasn't something I planned. And I started to think about why I would reply like that so quickly and why I said it with such conviction. And so I thought, well, you never know. Took a couple of writing courses on the internet. And by now it's the beginning of March, a year ago. And I decided I'll give it a try, and I'll take the rest of 2020 and see what happens, see if I can come up with anything good. And a week later, we were quarantined due to COVID. So I started writing. And surprisingly, I finished the first draft of my novel in 10 weeks, right around Memorial Day, and published it in July. And it's a scary process when you put your book out there. It's like, I tell people, it's like walking naked in traffic.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to happen, and you don't realize that it's scary or that it's going to happen until it does. And the feedback has been wonderful, and it encouraged me to keep writing. And I'm putting the finishing touches on my second novel, which is another standalone. It's not a sequel, not part of a series. And I'm hoping to release that in April.
Okay, good. So how many years were you a nurse?
Well, so I a little north of 40.
Wow.
Yeah. And I did a lot of various things, and I was fortunate in the last almost decade of my career that I actually worked from home, and this was pre-pandemic, but I was reviewing things on the internet as part of a nursing job. So probably would have retired before I did if I hadn't been working from home.
Yeah. COVID kind of changed everybody's lives.
Yeah, well, this was actually pre-COVID,
Okay.
but working from home is it's a wonderful thing. You are somewhat isolated, which I think everyone's found out now with COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I imagine being a nurse is very stressful.
yes, luckily the last position that I had was not working with patients, and I just say that not because I wasn't a good nurse, but because I didn't have the daily stress of working with patients on a daily basis. I was doing more administrative work.
Okay.
But
So tell us about Beneath the Blanket of Snow. Is it about nursing in any way?
no, and actually some of my friends asked me that when they knew I wrote a book. They said, "Oh, did you write about your experiences as a nurse?" And I said, "No." It is totally fiction, but like most people in the world, I underwent some adversities, came out stronger. But during my experiences, there were some emotions that I felt, some things that that I said, that I felt, and I incorporated some of those things into the main character, Meredith, who is one of four women in the book, who is going through an adversity. But the idea behind this book is that we all, I believe, most of us have something that we are not sharing with the world, not sharing with sometimes even our close friends or our spouse, and it's hidden. And in my book, there are four married couples, and each of them has something that they either were planning and hid from their spouse, or they did something that they hid, or they had their own troubles that they hid, and that really was the idea behind the title. That when you look at the snow when it's first fallen, and especially if you have quite a bit of it, before the elements get to it, and it's all pristine and pure and nice, and it looks pretty if you sit inside by the window. But once that snow melts, it starts to erode, it gets dirty. Then you find the imperfections underneath.
Yeah.
You find the cracks on the cement, or the grass that a bald spot in the grass, and weeds, things like that.
So it's about discovering things that aren't perfect.
Absolutely. And that was the main theme of the book. There are others, but basically we're looking at four couples who were affluent and seemed like they had it all. And, to an outsider, their lives were perfect, and they were not.
Yeah.
They were not at all.
That sounds very true to life.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think draws everyone to my book. I try to tell people it's not chick lit in the way that people think of books for women, although there have been a couple of people who described it as like a Desperate Housewives, or something like that. And I can't say I disagree, but I think it's a lot deeper than that. And most of my readers did too. And some of my readers have been men, and they didn't really expect that they would like this book, but they did because they said it was really much deeper than, women going shopping and going to the beach and, laughing over their college crush or things like that. There was none of that in here. They all had issues, like we
Yeah.
would say.
Don't we all?
Yes. And that's why I think everybody can relate to it, because I dare say that there's nobody who's had a perfect life, that
Right.
there's nothing that they wouldn't try to hide from other people.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to new authors or somebody that wants to write their first book?
Well, the first thing I would say is go for it, regardless of your age. And I never expected that I would do this. It was never in my retirement plan. And I would say that you should, do the best job you can, tell your story. Don't let somebody tell you that it's not good enough or you should write it a certain way. And as an example, I had a younger person who started to read my book before it was published. And, the women in this book were friends, but they weren't friends the way that that friends who would, drop everything and run and do everything for you, which came out in the book. But the young woman who read it took a little offense to that. And she said to me, "Oh, I don't know if I'd want to read this if they didn't, stick by each other." And, one of the things that I always heard before I wrote a book was that an author has a voice. And I didn't really understand that until I had my voice. And I actually fought for my voice. And I remember speaking with my husband and saying, "Well, but I don't want to change that in the book." And he said, "Well, you shouldn't change it. This is your book." And I said, "Yes, you're right." And I think my book is more to true life. And I think that that's what people should write. They should stick with what they want to write, not necessarily what somebody else thinks they should write.
Yeah. So do you read a lot?
I do. I read more now that I'm retired than I used to. I read mostly fiction, even historical fiction. I belong to 2 book clubs. The interesting thing is that if you had asked me before I wrote this book what kind of stories I'd like to read, I would have said I like to read stories about families and their problems and how they solve everything. And I did not realize until I had finished Beneath a Blanket of Snow that that's exactly what I had written. And my second book is not at all related to this, but again, it's a story of families and issues. And when I would read these books before, I would kind of think to myself, well, gee, you kind of have to be like a counselor to figure out how they're going to get all through their problems. But when you've been through life, and I guess been through your own issues and come out stronger, you kind of figure it out as you're writing, how somebody might handle something, what they might say. I've written scenes of people having an argument, and without using any profanity, you realize it's not that difficult to figure out what would tick somebody off and how they might respond and how the other person might respond. And then, the one person walks out or whatever. And I think that a lot of that is just life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I was retired before I wrote my first book also. So it's some of us have to go through life and a lot of things before we get to writing.
Yeah. And did you plan to write your book before you retired?
No. No.
Yeah, me neither. Say, and that's the beauty of this,
Yeah.
is that I didn't leave my job to write, and I didn't even tell anybody that I was doing this. My husband was the only one who knew. Actually, I didn't even tell him for a couple of weeks. He would pass by and he'd see me kind of hunched over the computer, and he'd say, and then I'd look and he'd walk by the room, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then one day he said to me, "What are you hiding there?" I didn't tell our children that I was writing it. And when I finished the draft, I sent it to a friend who was a writer. And I said, "Can you just, look at this, tell me what you think?" Because I had nothing to lose at that point. As far as I was concerned, I said to him, my bucket list said I was going to write a novel. That I did. If it's bad, I didn't tell anybody. There's only one other person who knows, and it doesn't have to be published. And when he got back to me and said, "I'm really enjoying reading this and it flows well," and then I thought, oh, wow. And so then I started to make plans to self-publish. And that's when I started to tell people what I had done.
So do you think reading really helps your writing?
Absolutely. And I tell people that I don't read the same way I used to. Sometimes I read slower. I read a passage and I say, wait, and I stop and I go back and I kind of dissect it and I look at the prose and I look at how it flows. Sometimes I don't like a particular sentence and I think on how I would rephrase it, how I would rewrite those two sentences.
So do you have a favorite author?
Well, people have, I love Toni Morrison. She's really someone to emulate. Someone asked me one time who I thought my writing in my book was most comparable to, and I chose Anita Shreve. And because I thought that, her books are also about families and issues. And she writes in a style that, I've said, you don't need to have a dictionary sitting next to you. There aren't so many words that you need to stop and look up, and you don't need an advanced degree.
Right. Do you have a favorite book?
Well, my very favorite book of all times is The Grapes of Wrath. And I'm just, blown away by what happened in the book, but also the ending of the book has stuck with me for decades. That every time, I have a copy in my house, and every time I walk by it, if I see it, I actually take it out to read the last couple of pages. Yeah. And this was a young woman in the book who had a baby who was stillborn, because of course they pretty much starved as they were going across the country. And so this baby really wasn't nourished, and the baby was born dead. And then within, I don't know, a day or two, when, of course, the woman's body after delivery gets ready to nurse a baby, whether there's a baby to nurse or not. And the last page of the book, they come across a man on the side of the road, an elderly man who was literally starving. And she nurses him. And it just blew me away. And I remember telling my son, I said to him, wait till you get to the ending, when he was going to read this book. And he came back to me and he said, did I really read what I thought I read? And I said, yes, you did. And that just, the whole book is great, but that ending just blew me away.
Yeah. Now, do your family members and friends read your books?
Yes. My husband, when he first read the book, asked me, he knew obviously my background, and, this is our second marriage. So, we both have a past. And so he said to me, so what in this book is true that I didn't know about? And I said, nothing, it's fiction. But yeah, they have read it. And I come from a family of readers. Our children are readers. Our grandchildren, the ones that are old enough to read, are readers. And so, I've kind of, I guess, been set up as an example of what you can do. And I actually dedicated my book to my children and grandchildren, and basically told them, reach for the stars, because you never know how far you're going to go. Yeah.
And you got to be okay with making a fool out of yourself.
Yeah. Well,
you don't mind being embarrassed, and you can go for it.
Yeah. And it's very interesting, because that's exactly, I had no idea that would happen, but I see other authors now who say, oh my God, I just pushed the button, or my book was just released and I'm so anxious, and, is this normal? I was saying, yes, and you don't realize it's going to happen until you're living it. And I remember putting it out on social media that I'd written this book. And of course, I hadn't told anyone. I told my family before it was going to be released. I told a couple of close friends, but that was it. And so I put this this post out on social media, and I say, guess what I did during COVID? I've written this book, and you don't know how it's going to be received. Mm-hmm. And then you don't know what's going to happen when people read it, and what kind of a review. And my first review that came in for the book came in a few days after it was released, and it was by someone who I do not know. And it was a wonderful review, and I found it probably a few minutes before I went to sleep, and I was just floored that for somebody that I didn't know, it wasn't a family member, it wasn't a friend. Yeah. It's a wonderful feeling.
And do you remember the first time somebody asked you to sign your book?
Yes. And I have, and because it's during COVID, there were a lot of paperbacks that I still have to go and sign a lot of books. But I did get, I got some copies, and I sent them to relatives, and signed them. But I also had other people who I have signed a few books, or people who said, I will buy, the paperback instead of the ebook if you promise to sign it. So I do have, things are going to open up, and I do have some books to sign. But and people who bought the book do not realize what a thrill it is for an author to sign a book.
I know.
I belong to two book clubs, and they both decided to read my book. And I, both of these have been on Zoom, but we're together and they're talking about the book, and I say to them, you have no idea what a thrill it is to be sitting and have, your peers talk about your book.
Yeah.
It is just incredible.
Yeah.
And it ranks up there with, some of the best things in my life.
Yeah.
It's
I understand.
yeah, I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So, what's
it's a
the next
wonderful
book
thing.
you're working on now, or do you have a name for it yet?
I do. It is called If We Had Known, and it's a family, and basically they I wouldn't say that they have adversities. One of them does. They have their own little issues, but and there were some surprises, and it basically comes down to if we had known some of the things that were going to happen to us in our lives.
Yeah.
And when I started this book, I did not realize that I was putting a little piece of myself in this book too,
Yeah.
because I wrote a part and I said, well, what if if I had had a crystal ball, the character was saying, if I had had a crystal ball, if I had known that these things were going to happen. And then I realized that how many times in my life I have said that, and specifically to some of the adversity. And I mean, I have said many times that, I'm really glad that I didn't have a crystal ball. I came out a much, much stronger person and much better in my life, getting through everything. But if someone had told me in advance, these are the things that you're going to have to endure in the next, how many years, I would have said, no, forget it.
Yeah.
Now, forget it. I don't want any parts of that. And so again, when I got to the crystal ball, I thought, wow, yeah. And I guess that's part of it. We can write some of what we know. And
Now, when I write fiction, there's a little bit of me in each character.
yeah. Yeah, it's another one of those things that you don't realize until you write. There was something fascinating, and I'm sure you can relate to this, but something fascinating that happened when I wrote the first book is that there was one of the characters who was keeping a secret from her husband, except it turned out that her husband knew for some time about the secret. But the really fascinating thing is that I did not know that he knew until I wrote it. And he said to her, I've known this for 5 years. And then I stopped and I said, what? And then it's what's my fingers typed. And to me, it was like one of the best parts of the book because it was such a surprise to me. And I've spoken to other authors who say, oh, my characters are doing things they're not supposed to. They hate each other and now they're in love with each other, or I'm trying to kill them off and they won't die. They have their own agency. It's incredible that happens.
And I think it gets to the point where I'm not creating the characters. They're just letting me know what they're really like.
I have heard that you're just basically, the writer is just a scribe.
Yeah.
For what the characters are really doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't stay dead if you write like some of us do,
Yeah. It's really interesting. Again, something I never would have understood if somebody said, my characters are doing things that I didn't know they were going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you write every day?
I don't I write most days. My first book I wrote every day, a few hours every day. And my second book, what happened was I started it in November during National Novel Writing Month. And it's a challenge every year during the month of November to write 50,000 words during the month of November. And I did, and I did it. And so then I took probably a week or 10 days or something off in the beginning of December to regroup. And then I wrote most days after that through, I would say, the rest of December and January. And I didn't quite have the ending down. I knew what I was going to do, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it. So I went back and I started to, do a little editing. And then when I came around the second time, I said, all right, I got to do it now. And I did. Most days I write. Some days, a few hundred words, a couple of pages. And some days I've written a few thousand words.
I read somewhere that Ernest Hemingway only wrote 500 words per day.
Well, I have heard that if you really need to push yourself to write, if you think that you can't write or you don't know what you want to write, that is the number that you should start with.
Yeah.
To just write 500 words. Of course, some of his books are quite long. It must have taken him a really long time to write 500 words.
Well, he stayed drunk most of the time, so
Yeah, but I have heard that that's a number, and because they figure that that's really about two pages. Once it's actually in a book, it's about 2 pages.
But I don't go by any of those rules. Sometimes I'll go months without writing anything.
Yeah.
And then I may sit down within 2 weeks, finish one, so it just comes in moods for me.
Well, I think that, you have to take advantage of when you have the urge to write or when you have an idea. And with my book, I know there would be times when I would be trying to hash out a scene in my mind, what I wanted to do. And then sometimes I just got up and had an idea for a sentence or two. And I would go back to the computer, except I would write 2 pages. And it just flowed.
Yeah.
But I think that that's a, the great thing about being able to do things electronically.
Yeah.
I'm not someone who felt that I have to keep a piece of paper, with me or to write things down. Sometimes with the first book, I would be lying in bed at night, and this was early on. I wrote the first chapter of the book, and then I said, okay, now what am I going to do? And I remember lying in bed around midnight saying, God, I have these women, and I have to develop them, and I have to have a storyline, and how am I going to do this? And I started to have some ideas, in my head. Of course, at midnight, that's not the time, to do this. And because you can't just turn it off. I didn't want to get up and write, but you can't just turn it off. I just say, okay, now I'm going to go to sleep, and it doesn't work that way.
I wish it did.
Yeah.
I wish it did.
But I did remember, people said, oh, but then when you got up the next day, you forgot. I said, oh no, I did not forget. It's just that you just can't turn it off. You can't just turn it off. And so it's 2 a.m. and you're trying to go to sleep.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap it up, you want to tell folks about your website and where they can buy your books and all that stuff?
Well, I do have an author profile currently on Amazon. And I have an author website that is currently being built. And but my book is available on Amazon, Beneath a Blanket of Snow. I am on Facebook, Arlene Marron. I'm on Instagram at Marronal, and on Twitter as Arlene Marron. But there is all that information is on the author profile on Amazon, and also I have a newsletter, and the link to that is also on my Amazon profile.
Well, great. I have enjoyed talking to you, Arlene, and I thank you again for coming on my show.
Well, I really appreciate this. It's been wonderful, Steve. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And folks, thanks for tuning in to Holding On with Holder. Please subscribe to my channel and share this video with your million closest friends, and be sure and buy Beneath a Blanket of Snow by Arlene Marron. Thanks again, Arlene. You have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye.